Okay, I'm going to begin. Enjoy.
My name is Virginia Felix. I just wanted to say thank you all for tuning in, and I'm really excited to be part of ClayHouston's Clay Creative Talk this month and have the opportunity to really share my relationship with clay as well as my process. And for those of you that are watching, I hope you are able to take away a few things from my practice and maybe apply it to your own work as well. I'll try to do quick with the intro. So I'm a ceramist based in Brooklyn, New York. I've been working with clay for the past 3 years now. I also do work full-time outside that at an investing firm. So anytime I have off on weekends or after work or even during quarantine, I'm spending that time focusing on clay. So the first time I was actually introduced to clay was in 2017. And it was at a 2-hour workshop at a local ceramic studio where I made this tiny uneven bowl at the wheel. And I actually have them here with me. And here it is. As you can tell, just by the look of this bowl, working with clay was very intuitive for me, especially on the wheel. And what really drew me to that workshop was that at that time, I was writing a memoir as an essay. And I was dealing with severe writer's block in which I would go weeks and months without being able to produce a single sentence. So I ended up signing up for a semester of both hand building and wheel drawing classes to really expand my creative outlet because I wasn't producing anything at that time. And ever since, I've been a member at that same studio, growing my practice and my relationship with clay. Currently, my work ranges from dinnerware to vases to functional objects and decorative sculptures, vice versa. I'm in the very beginning stages of my practice where I'm still settling into it, and I've been prototyping away, and luckily I've had the fortunate opportunity to work from home and really expand my practice as well as experiment with the material. And I just wanted to add that the studio that I'm currently a member at is a fully functioning studio in that they have all the clays, the pre-mixed glazes, the kilns and the wheels. And so because of COVID, they have to temporarily close down. So I didn't have much of a space to work out of. And in the earlier months this year, actually this past June, not earlier this month, this past June, I had moved into a 3-bedroom apartment where I took a spare bedroom and turned it into a studio that I now call my clay room, which I'll be actually giving a tour of right now. Okay, so here we are at the beginning of the studio tour, and I'll just start over to my right. So this is my only shelf I have in here. So on the top is, a few works that I did the last year. And down here, a few lamps that I'm currently wiring, and a few works that I'm still waiting to dry and work on. Down here are kind of my finished pieces, from bone dry to bisqueware to the final fire. And down here, I usually keep my other materials, my banding wheels, buckets, my plaster molds, and, a plaster board that I use to reclaim clay, and some more buckets, garbage can, some clay that I keep here. And down here, here I have a lighting kit, some shipping supplies, and what holds all that is actually my hand building table. I actually bought the wrong tabletop for this, hence why there's space here. So I figured it'll just have to do for now. And atop here, this is kind of like my mood wall, if you will. And, I usually keep this updated depending on the project that I'm working on. So currently it's a Figura project, and, my biggest inspiration for that is the structures of on Earth and, the human body, as well as, Barbara Hepworth. Yeah. And so just gonna move over to the left. Here is my wheel. And I have a mirror usually to help me visualize a little bit better instead of standing up and looking at it from far. I have to get a new tool. And here's my little cart that I use that I roll around whenever I need something. I keep almost everything in here between my extruder gun, a few bats and rolling pins and, all things of that nature. My beloved plants. And over back here, my bookshelf. So before actually furnishing this apartment, I was deciding on whether or not I wanted to keep my bookshelf in here or out in the living room. But, it was one of those things where I wanted to be surrounded by other artists, makers, and creators and writers. And so I usually find myself, whenever I'm feeling a little uninspired, I kind of come to this library and just pick, a few books and kind of just become inspired by them. So it's nice to be surrounded by other artists. And over here in this section, a few cleaning supplies and, and my buckets. So because this is a home studio and I really don't have any clay sink traps, I use these buckets to put all the wet clay in my slurry buckets. And, when the clay sifts down below, I extract the water from the clay itself, and I either reclaim that clay or just throw it out. But I do my best and try to reclaim that. And that concludes the end of my studio tour. Now we'll get into a few slides. Thank you for watching. So I hope you guys enjoyed that tour. It wasn't much. It's still a work in progress. So I actually put together a few slides of some of the pieces that I've created because many of them are actually no longer with me. Either I sold them or scrapped them. So it's a few slides, and I'm going to go over some of my old pieces and a current project that I'm currently working on. Hi again. So here are the slides I put together. Again, most of these pieces were either sold or scrapped, so I'm really happy to have kept the photographic inventory of them to share them with you. So let's get started. So here is a piece. This is the second thing I ever created with clay. It's intended to be vase, and it turned out to be a little over 20 inches tall. And at this time, I was learning how to coil, and it got to a point where I just kept on coiling, and I didn't know how to bring it in, hence it being so tall and wide. The coils here, when I was adding to it, they were at least 2 inches in thickness, and it really allowed me to add to the walls quickly. And it was actually one of the first things I had learned in my hand building class, which I still apply to today. Here's another piece I made in my first year of using clay. And after having finished my classes, I wanted to start experimenting more with the different outputs of clay. So for example, I wheel droned the base, I extruded the coils with an extruder, I pinched the round part of it in the center, and I slab rolled the top parts. And I was testing the limits of clay in the various ways I could attach each piece that were created differently by scoring and using slip to attach each part. This was my first attempt at making something sculptural, but also functional. And if you're wondering, what part of this piece is functional, there are 2 small openings, one at the center and one at the top. And it's meant to carry like a single stemmed flower or so. And this is another interesting piece I made last year. Here, I'm trying to show how I actually made this piece. First, I created a cylinder base that was slightly widened at the top, and then I added coils to the part that I wanted to lengthen and add to. And I just continued coiling upwards until I got to a length that I was comfortable with. And I kind of smoothed out the surface just so it can have like a cleaner look to it. Because I'm still learning about glazing and on how and why they do what they do for a particular piece. And if you look at the third picture, this piece gave the glaze I decided on this piece gave this piece 2 contrasting colors with a lot of pinholes. And I was wondering if it had anything to do with the smoothness of the greenware before firing, because in my next picture, this is my second attempt at making the same piece, but using a very different clay body and a different glaze and a different process. And instead of coiling the tubes, I slab rolled them and I scored and attached them using slip. And as you can see here, though it's a different clay body and a completely different glaze, the glaze finishing is a lot cleaner and far more smoother. As the tubes here were slab rolled and barely manipulated with my hands. So, and I wanted to add that the studio that I'm a member at, I don't have much room to experiment with the mixing of glazes or the firing temperature, so I use with what I have currently. This is another piece that got me into thinking about the curvature in the negative space, and I wanted to start introducing that more into my hand building work. I spent maybe about 7 days on this piece, and maybe 3 to 4 hours each time.
And, in those times I was adding to it, cutting pieces, smoothing its body out, and, just being undecided about where I wanted it to go. And, really learning how to manipulate clay in its most malleable stages. And I ended up scrapping up this piece because as I kept building up, it became more impractical. And I just thought, yeah, this isn't working out. And, after a couple of days, I just began to feel discouraged with it. And this is one of the pieces that I had a hard time letting go because of all the time I dedicated to it. And it wasn't until I decided to reclaim this clay that it's really important to let go of the piece, to destroy it as quickly as possible and just start again, and it's something I started doing more frequently. And I found that, if I'm going to spend so many hours on a piece, I better have learned from it. And, what this piece has taught me was that this is what clay fundamentally is, showing up, knowing the risk, and being vulnerable to it, almost like any art medium. And, it's very similar to writing for me, and just being okay with questions like, what if it doesn't come out right? Or what if I spend all this time on something for nothing? And I learned that with clay, you can't dictate. But only let it guide you and teach you, just as our world does. And that was the starting point of the Fragora project for me, to draw that parallel between clay and earth. And I'll be getting into that right now. So earlier this year, I started the Fragora project. And, my objective with this project was to recreate vessels that somewhat reflect Earth's Earth structures, by really focusing on the negative spaces and the deep shadows in those spaces. And the parallel that I have drawn from working with clay and using earth as an inspiration is that both are very elemental, organic, and extremely volatile. You never really know what the next day is going to be like, just like you just don't know where a piece may take you or how it may turn out. And, aside from our very earth being used as inspiration, there is a sculptor I'm really fond of. Her name is Barbara Hepworth. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she was a British sculptor, and she was best known for her biomorphic creations carved out of stone. And she really opened a door for me to start thinking about representing shapes and forms into their most essential components. And she taught me to focus on the absence rather than the presence. And by stripping down that excess and emphasizing, on the curvatures and the shadows, my work enables viewers to imagine what's missing while also considering what's there. And so I guess, what I mean by that is take a look at these vessels, these sculptures, and, and know that it wouldn't be what they are without their negative space to support their overall structure of the piece itself. And I'll just get right into it. So originally, I was actually planning a trip to head out west to the canyons and to see the arches over in Arizona and some parts of Utah. And because of COVID, I had to virtually research these structures instead. And I began my research by Googling images of these canyons and arches. And I came across these beautiful images of the Antelope Canyon in Arizona and a few caves in Utah. And so I would find these images and think, okay, I want to recreate this structure with using clay. And this is one of the first sculptures I worked on as part of the Fragora project with that objective. And I used the first image to help inspire at least the start of it, using the empty space inside of it or around it to help really inform this piece. And when I was done with the overall shape of the piece, it gave me its own story outside of the picture that I was inspired of. And it brought me to start considering incorporating a body's shape, more particularly a woman's shape, where curves are either found at the hips or at the bent of an arm or legs, or considerably a woman's reproductive organ. And as you can see, the last picture is myself trying to emulate the sculpture itself. This is where I introduced the biomorphic part to it, where I wanted to start exhibiting the appearance of living things. And after that, I increasingly became concerned with how ceramic fit in with the rest of the world. So I kept searching for images for my next inspiration for my next sculpture. And while I was looking for more images for inspiration, I found this very image again, But instead, I found myself getting trapped in this rabbit hole of researching the origins of this cave, which I did not know was a cave prior to the sculpture and photo. And interesting and more coincidentally enough, it's a cave called the Birthing Cave. And I'll just be brief with its history. It's in Sedona, Arizona. It's in the Mescal Mountains, where the Hopi, a Native American tribe, live on this reservation, and they believe that their people came from the center of the earth. And, you know, the Hopi would send their pregnant woman to this very cave and, oddly enough, give birth. So the woman would hike up to this cave before going into labor and sit and wait and pray to give birth, and their child would be born. And, you know, it's interesting to me because I was drawing parallels with the story of both earth structure and the ceramic piece instead of just a visual component of it. And it confirmed that there is a universal language in art with earth and ceramics, at least for this piece. And starting this project and having finished this piece really kind of allowed me to grow as an artist, because it has really shaped my process a little bit more, because this piece became just a lot more meaningful. And I'll just move on to the next one. So here's the sculpture, the same sculpture existing in their development. The first image is obviously a piece before it is shaven down with a Surform tool. And if you aren't familiar with a Surform, it's a tool that I use for clay, and it features a perforated sheet metal. It kind of resembles like a food grater, if you will. And at this stage, it's in its leather hard stage, where I can easily create depth without destroying the core of the piece. And on the right is the finished piece atop my stove, hence, you know, coronavirus. I could have chosen to smoothen out the texture, but I really like the way the Surform left the piece. It added to the texture, especially when I was trying to resemble something from Earth. And, you know, sometimes even the appearance of skin on different animals. So that was what I was aiming for. And here's a similar piece to the last one, in that I placed my focus at the center, the negative space, and leaving the texture roughened. My favorite part about making this piece was giving it depth in order to create that shadow you see at the center. You know, I use extremely thick coils to give me room to shave parts of it. And here's the piece in its development stage, and it's at the studio this time. When I started the center, opening was extremely small, and luckily I added the coils, and it was thick enough that I was able to make that negative space wider. And at this stage, the walls were so thick. I mean, the coils were at least 4 inches in thickness this time. And it was so thick that I was able to shave it down considerably. And, you know, this piece was done over several days. I mean, I would say even 2 weeks, because time is essential when working with clay. Otherwise, it would have never taken this shape or hold its form. This is sculpture. Here's another sculpture. This is probably one of my favorite sculptures of this project, because to me, it's more than just its shape and a lamp, really. And I'll get into that a little later. It resembles the delicate arch, a widely recognized symbol of the state of Utah. And it's actually it's currently the largest freestanding arch in the park. And just before talking about this piece, just a couple things about the arch itself. It was formed of the Entrada sandstone, which are the rocks formations during the Jurassic period, which was 56 million years ago. And when the Etruscs, and just to describe a little bit about what the Entrada sandstone is that it's originally sandstone fin, which are rocks that are formed from the naturally occurring material that is broken down from weathering or erosion, and it's transported by the wind, water, or, you know, just by the force of gravity alone. And so throughout those years in the weathering process, it left the arch the way it is today. And it's interesting because in some odd way, Earth is creating its own sculptures and structures around the planet. But back to the sculpture. So I started this piece with 2 balls of clay, and the way it got its height a little bit was I pinched it to be tall enough, and then I added coils until I got it to a height that I was comfortable with, and I joined them at the top using the coiling method as well. And And in the inside, like in the center part of it where the negative space holds, I used my widest trimming tool to shave that excess down and really give that curving shape. And as for the lamp, adding light wasn't something I originally planned for, but I did wanted it to be functional. So I gave this sculpture a couple of openings to be able to run the wiring through, and it became a functional piece. Here's something that I also include in my process. So as part of my process, I write in a small notebook while I create. I carry this notebook anytime, either I'm at the studio or at my home studio, and sometimes it's just everywhere with me, really. And I have been keeping an archive of my thoughts that occurred when I worked with clay since the very beginning of my practice. And sometimes it would pertain to a particular piece. Other times it's free writing and maybe a few entries that would include frustrations of that day. And those entries sometimes would serve as an introductory to an essay. Essentially, an object produces an essay or parts to it, or an essay can produce an object or parts to it. But today I like to call them my field notes. And here are a couple of entries that I had written in my sketchbook journal from last year to earlier this year. And I guess I can read an entry or two. I guess from the first photo, an attempt to combine sculptural and functional elements in an object with respect to space, shadow, and self, using the self to draw inspiration from female body, skin color, hair texture, and color and culture. And from the last photo, it can't be planned. I come in with sketches, planned schedules to end up making completely different forms. Art is selfish, clay is selfish. It wants what it wants, and we have no choice but to give it what it wants. I'm feeling stuck here at clay, unsure of my next few steps, unsure of where I want this supposed collection to go. Now I remember this was at the start of the year when I was starting the Figura project without any clue of, how I wanted it to go. And I just wanted to add that it's nice to go back and read these entries and remember those feelings of those days and reflect on a former self and really see how much I've grown as an artist. And it helps really start like a new essay if I'm ever in the mood to write again, because I'm still suffering from writer's block. But yeah. This is an example of a piece I wrote while I was creating as part of the Figura project. And so the writing part of making clay became an important part of this project because as a human who is essentially from Earth, in the same way that clay is, as well as the organic structures, my thoughts are formed in the same way, with randomness and no particular order. And, I guess I can get into the writing part of the sculpture and decipher a few sentences. It reads, to create objects with meaning is to practice patience, to remember that Earth turns as we move in it. I breathe through this piece, feeling the space in between my fingers, remembering the coils in my hair. And here I'm resembling clay coiling to the coiling in my hair when my hair is wet and curly. I'll just keep on. The clay is embraced on my skin. This piece is a number of days, using 10 fingers to carry over the lineal heritage of who I am, both body and mind, discovering sacred symbols and metaphors, and at the center, a calling for healing, reform, and energy. I carefully identify with this object through its looking through and the space it takes. Curves, torso, arms, pelvic, fertility, skin. To caves, crevices, and nature as female. This piece is me. And my last slide here, this is another writing piece, except for this sculpture, it was the opposite. The sculpture itself inspired the words, and I'll quickly run through a few sentences. It reads, I cannot escape my identity, but become it. Actively experiencing two-ness is a resignation to a desolated life. And, just to describe a little bit about what that is. As a person of color, I actively experience a sense of two-ness in my everyday life. And just to describe what two-ness is, it's a term coined by W.E.B. Du Bois, who was an African-American civil rights activist, and he used this term to describe an individual whose identity is divided into several facets. And in this case, I'm a person of color and an American. And I find that I always have to adjust in accordance to those identities. And if you can see the body of the lamp, it has two similarly looking legs, but they both have their subtle differences. And that's a resemblance to the term two-ness in what I feel. And I'll just keep on. Clinging to a feeling of separateness, turning words into things and things into life. So essentially, words inspiring sculpture and the sculpture becoming tangible, or vice versa. The freedom to exist as is conjured through hope by light. So here are the two legs of the vessel that are conjoined at the top to make one entire piece, and the light is essentially a symbolization for hope. I'll continue. And as dust scratched from its surface, lingering mid-air, making home in the tissues of my lungs, this piece and I become one. In permanence, it remains. So you know the texture of clay and the way I shave it down during its bone-dried stage? It naturally creates dust. And as all of you know, clay is this hazardous material that scars your lungs when it's dry and it's in the air. So I know for a fact that I'm inhaling dust when manipulating this bone-dried piece. I'll continue. To create with all six senses. The sixth as an emotion is a meditation, a practice of transformation and the transcendence from soul to vessel. We are our own art. So for this piece, it's a piece I can mostly identify with because it resembles me through writing, at least. And that really wraps up the Figura project. It is something that it's still in the beginning stages, and it's still something I'm exploring and expanding and learning from. And I really hope that there was something that you all could take away from this part of the talk. So now I'm going to move into the demo of one of these sculptures to show how I add negative space to them while giving it depth.
Hi again. So here we are at the demo. So today we'll be demoing how to make this piece and really do this negative space here, and how I really got this curve and I was able to build up. So I gave myself a head start. So the way I start with this little tray, if you will, I slab roll the bottom half. It's probably like maybe 1 centimeter in thickness, and currently it has 1 coil. And then I would just add an extra coil. You can see how thick my coils are here. I was saying in the video how that broke. And I've explained why I use thick coils in this process. So I kind of place it on top there. Here it's not smudged yet. But the reason why I use thick coils is I like to really smudge all that extra clay just to give the wall that was already there some more thickness. And I'll just go around quickly. And another reason why I use thick coils is so when I'm adding to the walls, instead of adding a ton of skinnier coils, I use this thick coil and I kind of pinch up, and it adds maybe like ½ centimeter to the wall, and it makes it much faster to do. I noticed. I mean, I kind of just finished moving. So for the sake of this video, this is not going to look as appealing as I usually work, so I'm going to work much faster. Okay, so I already got to the part where I was uncomfortable in the height of this. So now I'm going to start focusing on, giving this a little curve, or at least the start of the shape when I'm going to, divide the two sides. So from here, I like to add 2 coils. I love coiling, as you can tell. And I'm kind of round it here. And I'm going to break that off here, and I'm going to add 2 separate coils. So you can see here. So essentially, it looks something like this. All right, 2 openings. And, again, we just smudge that in really good. I smudge the outside as well as the inside. And I really have much room to just add a little bit because the thickness of the wall that was already there is very thick. But I try to smudge really good, that way I'm not trapping in any air. And that's what the squeezing helps too. Kind of like, if there's any air, it kind of just dissipates because kind of squeezing it out. Just smudge this side. Sorry, this is in the way. So here are the coils. They're kind of smudged. Again, this is terrible looking, but you know, it's a start. And so what I like to do here, I would like to take my wooden tool and kind of place it at an angle in which I want to angle my sculpture. So I kind of I take my finger and I kind of push out to the wooden tool. That's what I'm doing now. And if anything, I kind of just, you know, scrape there. So it gives it that, you know, that cleaner shape here compared to the other side. So I do that again. Just move a little closer. I do that again to the other side. Just pushing. I'm really pushing a lot here. And so any spaces in which I find that the walls are extremely thin or getting far thinning, I kind of just add clay, you know. I'm sure you know that. So here in the middle, there's kind of a little opening, because remember, I added 2 separate coils. And so what I like to do is I like to kind of smudge those pieces together to create like one giant piece, you know, to hide any gaps or openings, really make it fun. And so after I'm done smudging that opening in, I like to get even more clay and kind of really reinforce the top. And I get more clay and I reinforce the bottom. Almost like a Band-Aid, if you will. I mean, I make sure that I'm squeezing enough that, again, I'm removing any trapped air or any openings that I might have missed from, you know, moving this fast. And so here's the start of it. I'm sorry if you hear any dogs barking. My neighbor's dog, I guess they're out. They're barking at each other. So from here, I would just keep coiling. Just add another coil. I have these pre-rolled coils. So usually I would roll up my coils on a table just to make sure that all the sides are even. But because of the space and, you know, for the sake of this video, I kind of like squeeze them out. It adds length to them quickly, and, you know, moving pretty fast. So here we are. And a quick tip about coiling at an angle. Instead of just, you know, putting it right on top, it looks like I'm going up. So for this case, I like to go more on a curve. So what I have to do is I kind of bring it out a little, you can see here, and I tuck the inner part inwards. And I use the outside to tuck that in, and the inside of this to bring it out. All right. I'll just smush that in quickly. And I would just keep coiling until I'm at a height that I'm comfortable. So I actually made a piece already that I was comfortable with the height. So I can really show you the next part and how I got this curvature and how I was able to keep this structure, keep the shape the way it is. So I would roll out a coil and I use it and I attach it and use it as an outline, if you will. And, you know, because this clay is kind of just a little bit hardened, it's able to hold its form. Otherwise, it would have just flopped down. So I would kind of just, you know, shape it in a way that I want it to look in the inside. And I wouldn't squeeze this as much because this is the thickness that I'm really looking for, just to give you room to shape it down. And then I would just, you know, smudge the inner part in, the outer part out, I guess. And, you know, right now I'm not really focused on, you know, the texture of it because, again, I will use the leather hard stage to really shape down any excess or any shape that I wasn't really looking for. Okay. And so from here, I really have the angle that I have. So I know that I want this opening, and all I have to do is just add around it, right? So sometimes my coils are this thick, but in this case, it's too thick. So I would take here and I would just add it, right? Almost like I'm covering it up. See here? So for this case, because I want to come a little more outwards, I kind of just make this sit on that wall there. And I use the new coil to add to that wall, just to, you know, reinforce the glazed wall. And so I just saved myself like maybe 4 minutes and adding a tiny coils, and I just squeeze up, squeeze up, squeeze up, squeeze up, squeeze up, squeeze up. And if ever I find that this is too big, like in this case, this is extremely too big, I would just take my needle tool, and I would carve like a V shape here, right, all the way through, and I have that opening here. It leaves me with this opening. I'm kind of like stitching it up in a way to make that opening smaller. And again, because clay is so malleable, this shape right here does not matter because I can always just, you know, really reinforce the shape that I want and give it space. So yeah, that's how I add to this part, you know, by using an outline, and it really helps in letting me know where I want to go with a piece. So I usually try to outline most of my pieces with clay itself, and I add clay in the spaces that, you know, that need it clearly. And so I would just keep on adding clay. Right? So this would probably take me like another couple days, because if I just keep adding the clay on top of this, it'll just start to like, you know, fumble over here, which is what's starting to do now. Once I get to the leather card staging, when I'm completely done, I really shade it down with this tool. If you aren't familiar with what it does, this is what a sureform looks. It's like a food grater, and you know, I can't really use it now because the clay is wet, and it'll just get stuck and messy. It'll be hard to clean. So yeah, that's how I get to that shape. And I'll just keep going, I guess. And I would just keep on adding. Keep on adding, keep on adding. So let's say if I wanted to start coming in, I would just add a coil here. And, you know, I would start using this coil to outline where I want the shape to go. And so this is where I want my curve to start. So what I like to do is I would have something ready already. I would get something extremely thick. Like I always work with extremely thick coil or pieces. That way it gives me room to manipulate it. So I have this coil here, and this is kind of floating midair. So I would just use this to kind of patch that up here. Patch that up. And I would just smudge, you know, pieces together. And if there's ever any space where you find that you're running out of clay, you know, you just get more clay and just, you know, keep patching that up. It's all about patching up. And for the sake of this video, I'll just keep it brief. And that's how I get that curve there. And so from here, I'm almost done. So I would just keep on coiling upwards. And I'll just do this quickly. Okay. And now just add to this. So this is in no way how it actually worked. I'm just moving fast, just so this video doesn't take longer than what it should be for you guys. But here, you kind of get the gist of it, right? I hope. This is extremely thick. This is a mess. But I just wanted to show you in how I shaped it, really. This is extremely big for my sculptures. But, you know, again, I have a lot of space to shape down and stuff. And, you know, if I ever find that, again, like if I feel like this opening is coming too out or too in, or it's just too big overall, I would just, you know, I wouldn't be afraid to just cut access, you know? And this is the best part with working with a lot of clay, because it gives me room to do that. This is not sealed at all, but yeah, here's the overall shape. And so I would just keep on going until I got to, you know, this piece. And obviously I'm not going to do the other side. It would take me twice as long. But just so you can see how I complete it. Here, so like one side is halfway done. And so again, I would just keep coiling. And then once I get to this part, it's kind of just really figuring out how I want to do it. So again, I would like shape it, right? So here I have this piece, and usually coils would be here, would be added as well there too. So I'll just do that. So this is really quick. That's okay. Because this is the part where I can give it depth. Here you go. So you see how that closes that up there? Maybe this angle's better. It closes it up there, and then I would just do the same for that side. And so when I get to the top part, I bring it in a little more. So ideally, this part would already be here. And so once that's there, I kind of just, really start to just do regular circular coils. Let's say again, this piece is already done here, and I was ready to start working on this top part. I would just have those pieces here. This is really thick. Sorry. And you have some idea, this angle is probably better, but you have some idea on how I kind of end it. Really finish and really bring it in. Then I just keep coiling. So I coil until I'm all even at the top. Just pinch that wall, just to give it height a little. Here, hopefully you have some idea on how this piece looks, by using outlines and extremely thick coils. This piece is missing an entire section, but you get the gist of it. And, sometimes I like to really carve while I'm working at it just to see if it's something I want to continue doing. And it makes it much easier to do the inside when it's malleable, because with my Sureform tool, I can't really get in there. I really hope you were able to take away something from this part of this talk. And if you have any questions, I'm open to answering any. And then, I'm really looking forward to speaking to you guys in the Q&A coming up. So thank you for watching.
Thank you so much for that, Virginia. I now would like to open it up for Q&A. So I think that, let's see, I'm looking through the chat first. One question, Virginia, is from Elizabeth, and she's asking, what clay or clays are you using?
So for all of my sculpture pieces, I use 420 sculpture clay. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 420 sculpture. It has a lot of grog in it, which is able to kind of hold that form and shape throughout the creation of it. So for the sculpture pieces, I tend to use a lot of 420 sculpture clay, which is provided by the studio. Mm-hmm. And also, before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for speaking a mile a minute. I noticed while I was watching the video, I couldn't even keep up, but I hope you guys were able to, still get through that.
It was totally fine, but thank you. So another question from Elizabeth is, do you paddle the shape to refine and compress once you've created the form?
Yeah, so in places where I can't get my fingers in, I kind of just slap it with this tool. It's like the thick wooden tool. I got it from Garrity Tools, and it helps to get to the part where it's kind of still had holes in it, kind of. So yes, I do paddle to refine and compress the shape, and I also like to use my wooden tool to get into it to smudge any openings I have, to really get the clay to smudge together, to get the air traps out of there and form it. Mm-hmm.
And then the last question in the chat before we open it up to anyone who wants to ask anything else is, what cone firing do you use?
So at the studio that I'm a part of, I don't have control for the cone firing, but they do offer cone 6 and cone 10. But all of my pieces, I fire them to cone 6. I'm too afraid about using it to cone 10. I'm not sure what that would look like. It's probably an experiment that I'll do sometime later this year, but I'll see how it goes. But so far, only cone 6, and I think that goes up to 2,250 degrees, I believe. Not entirely sure.
All right, thank you. And Abby has a question. She is wondering if you're at Brooklyn Clay.
Yes, I am. That is my studio. That's where I learned all of my hand building and wheel throwing. And I've been a member since, actually. I love that place. So yeah, Brooklyn Clay.
How does the studio work? Is it, how many members are in there? And is it kind of a situation where you can come in and out as you please? Or do you have set studio time?
So before coronavirus, it was a 365-day, 24-hour kind of studio where they gave me a code and I can go in whenever I want to make or, grab clay. There is a section for students, so there's a section for wheel throwers and hand builders, and it's helpful because there's different sections in which you can work at, and I would say that. Are there a lot of members? I mean, it's hard to say because when I'm there, there are barely people there. But I would say that their studio is sometimes full at capacity. Currently not at the moment because of coronavirus, of course. But I would say that before COVID, they were at full capacity. I'm not entirely sure the number of people there are, but it is, I would say that all the shelves are filled and they do have a considerable amount of shelves available there. So yeah, I would say it's a really good community of ceramic artists to be around with. Yeah.
Great. And then another question from the chat, and I do want to remind people, if you want to come off mute and ask a question in person, you're more than welcome to. But one that came up in the chat was, how do you transport from your home to your kiln at the studio?
So I have these really big shipping boxes that I use to ship some of my pieces, and I either put them in there. So when I'm when I'm transporting them, they're at the bone dried stage, right? So I have a ton of paper, a ton of like blankets, cushioned between the sculptures. And I feel like the 40-minute ride from my home studio to the studio is probably the scariest ride ever, because I'm afraid that the pieces will just all crumble, which hasn't happened, luckily. So yeah, I use these bubble wraps and excess paper that I have really in boxes, and I'd seatbelt them down to the car, as ridiculous as that sounds, but it helps.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Oh, sorry. Just wanted to say you did, I think you did a great job with your slides and stuff, and your pieces are really nice. I wanted to know, how long does it usually take for you to make at least like one of your pieces?
I mean, from start to complete firing finish, roughly 4 weeks, only because it is a communal studio where other people are firing their works, and I have to wait around that time. But between building it and getting it to a stage for it to be fired, roughly maybe a week, 2 weeks, and it depends on the size of the piece. Because again, if you keep stacking clay on top of clay, wet clay that is, it'll just collapse on itself and it won't hold that shape. So for one of my sculptures, I know it took me 2 weeks to complete in between drying, because I would take it off the bag and then I would put it back and I would wet it and it would just be too wet to add. So it all depends on the size of the piece. But my quickest sculpture piece probably took me 1 week to complete, not firing it though, but just 1 week to complete. And that was pretty cool, I guess.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I have a question. I was wondering, the forms you make are just incredible, like really captivating. And I was wondering, as you're building them, do you find yourself being drawn to the negative space or the actual positive space of the form? Or do you find that, like, I personally, like, for some reason, the negative space really resonates with me. So I'm just wondering if you like kind of go back and forth, if it's like a balance, or if you're more drawn to one or the other.
I would say both. I feel like I take both into consideration. I feel like it's important, especially when working with the negative space while using the positive space. But I noticed when I was making one piece, the negative space, I noticed it was too small and it wasn't a piece that I wanted to look like. So I ended up carving a hole big enough and really focused on the negative. And while I was focusing on the negative, it kind of took away from the positive, like you would say. And it let me think, like I just had an example here about this piece. I know you guys saw it here. So this was the piece that I was talking about in that I created the hole much bigger. And I actually wanted the hole to be this bigger. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if you guys can see that depth there. But yeah, I try my best to place focus on the inside. That way, the outwards can look bigger than what it originally planned for, I guess. So.
I have a question. Are you planning on having or have any interest in doing an exhibition or a solo exhibition, or are you more just making pieces for yourself, or do you sell them? How does that work as part of your, your creativity?
Well, I originally wanted to do like a little house in the local gallery that we have here, but because of COVID, it kind of stopped me from planning that. But it's still something that I want to continue going towards because the Figura project is something I'm still experimenting with, and there are some sculptures that I want to start working on, like some new ideas. But yeah, eventually maybe if I find myself finding an opening studio where I can exhibit these pieces, and yeah, it's something that I really am looking forward to by the end of this year. Otherwise, I feel like I wouldn't have completed the project. But yeah, it is something that's still in the works.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you leave your pieces unglazed, or do you put a glazed surface on them?
For the sculptures, I don't use any glaze. I feel like glaze is my worst. I hate, glazing is my worst part of working with clay. For whatever reason, I just don't understand glaze. So because I wanted to have control over my sculptures, I left glaze out of it. And at the studio, I don't have control over the mixing of glazes. So I didn't want it to come out in a way that I didn't intend for. And I also wanted to, resemble the texture of the piece, to resemble the structures of earth and how it's roughened and how it's technically how it looks. So I leave them unglazed. And I would say, if you guys notice, some of the pieces, they were either white or tan yellow. Those were in between the firing. So the ones that were yellow, they were fired twice from bisque to the final fire. And the ones that were left white, they're just bisque fired. And I leave them unglazed.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Great job, by the way.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? I had a couple for you, Virginia. As you mentioned that you have a career outside of ceramics, and I was wondering how you balanced that with, working in your studio, either at Brooklyn Studio or at your home. Do you have a set routine, or is it more of an organic thing?
So I would say, luckily, because of since moving and being able to have my home studio, I was able to have that flexibility and have a wheel here where I can throw whenever I want. And I noticed that balance became much easier because I do work 9 to 5. And I found that the older I got, the more I just wanted to come home. I didn't want to be out late. I didn't want to, do anything else. I just wanted to come home and just relax. And so it was a lot harder before having a space to actually work at, because the studio that I'm a member at is 40 minutes from where I live. So, and I would commute via train. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy balance. So, I'm really glad to have the studio where I can work out of whenever I want, wake up without having to answer to anyone, or really just, be in my zone alone and create things without feeling embarrassed about what I'm creating in front of anybody. And I would say that, I make sure to practice a lot of self-care and take those mental health days, even take a break from my creative practice, because you do need a break from everything, even when it's something that you use to help you forget something else. And I would say, luckily, Clay is still something that I use to balance my 9 to 5 because it's not as demanding. So I would say, it is helpful to be able to come in whenever I want to this room and come in and leave at whatever time I want.
We have another question in the chat. Have you considered slips or underglazes to add color, or even coloring the clays yourself with oxides or mason stains?
I am a little familiar with slips and underglazes. They do offer slips at the studio, and as far as mason stains, I hear that I've always wanted to try working with mason stains, but I heard that they're really toxic. So I wouldn't introduce that to the studio, but if I wanted to bring it here, I know I would need to get like a one of those respirator masks that I don't own yet. So I'm really afraid with just introducing that to the apartment because clay itself, I'm tracking it from room to room and I'm not really noticing the mess I'm making. But eventually at some point, it's something that I would like to introduce later for other projects even. But at the moment for this particular project, I want to keep the color all in one uniform color and just keep that texture the way it is in color as natural as I can, if possible. Yeah.
And something else that I was wondering, I noticed that on your website, you have a shop update coming soon. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your new collection or tell us what we can expect to see from you in the next few months.
Yeah, so I've been working on this dinnerware collection where it's, salad bowls, mugs, and cups, and just bowls overall. And, a few other objects, including vases and maybe incense holders. I want to create more of a functional piece rather than sculptural. Really get my hands on the wheel, which, I recently had bought. So yeah, I'm actually planning on opening that new shop maybe late September. Hopefully everything comes out fine because, glazing is not my strong suit. So I'm still getting a grasp of all that. So I'm really excited about introducing, the dinnerware into my shop this coming fall.
I think that you'll bring some of the forms from your figurative work into your dinnerware, or is it going to be kind of a separate collection?
No, it'll be all together. I am still trying to figure out whether I want to include, the functional sculptures, the lamps that I created into the shop. But yeah, they might be on the website. I haven't made the final decision yet because I'm still so focused on the dinnerware part of the shop, but possibly, yeah.
And someone was asking what your website is. So I'll type it in, but is it keraclay.com or .org?
.com, yes. Mm-hmm.
Type it in right now for Elizabeth. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question. Do you ever foresee yourself leaving the 9 to 5 and going full time into clay? Is that something that you'd like to do?
That's a dream. I mean, yes, actually I do. I really hope that I can get keraclay to a point where I don't have to rely on my 9 to 5 to fund this passion of mine. But it helps in a way because I can't imagine myself giving clay the full throttle. I probably because I can't envision my ceramic business expanding like that. I don't know what it is. But yes, I do hope that I will get to a point where I can leave my 9 to 5 and really focus my attention on clay and really grow that.
I have one more question. Where did keraclay come from, the name? I don't think you mentioned that.
It's a funny story, actually. I don't know. When I was officially decided to open up a little business, I was stuck on the name. Like, it has to be a catchy name. It has to be this name that's, short and sweet and simple and, memorable. And, I wanted to, I'm so into finding meaning into things, right? So I started researching the origins of clay, the name of clay, and I came to this Greek term called keramik, which in Greek is clay, ceramics. And so I took the short from kera, and then I to clay because it's, you know, it's tied to ceramics. And then I realized literally a year later that my name essentially is clay, ceramics, ceramics. But, you know, keraclay is something that I kind of grown on me. So I basically just decided to stay with it. And, you know, it's redundant as the name sounds. It's catchy to me, or I feel like I've grown to love it.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So last call, does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much. Just as a reminder to everyone, we are going to be posting Virginia's wonderful talk online. So feel free to go to our website or to our Facebook rather and Instagram to revisit it if you'd like. And I think Virginia said that she would be happy to answer questions if they do come up later on. So if anything else comes up, don't hesitate to share that with us. And Virginia, thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate it, and we loved learning about your work, and we're super excited to see what you have planned for the future. So thank you from all of us. This was great.
And thank you all for having me and, you know, having a chance to give my artist talk. If any of you guys don't know, this is my first artist talk. So I'm sorry if I'm a little nervous, but, you know, I'm really glad you guys were able to tune in and maybe get something from my talk.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to see everyone, and please keep in touch with us, Virginia. And again, we look forward to seeing what you have planned for the future. So thank you so much, and have a good rest of your weekend.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for sharing.